Welcome to the Underdog Sniper Podcast. I am your host, MGCovers. This is episode 43. Greatly appreciate you guys tuning in. Hope you had a really good weekend. Had a lot of things going on. Had football. I know a lot of people watching football playoffs. My Redskins finally won a playoff game. Y'all, the first playoff game they've won since, I believe it was 2006. So big, exciting day for old school Redskin fans, even though they're the Commanders now. So I was excited. I really watched it. That was so much fun watching that game. A lot of enjoyment out of that. And super excited. Probably going to get blown out by Detroit. I don't know. I think that line opened at like -8.5, but who knows? It's a playoffs. All right. So let's review and go through everything we're going to talk about on today's podcast. We're going to review all of our wagers for this past week. You'll see a year-to-date betting log. Also going to review the changes I've made to models. We've had a ton of progress. We'll look at NHL, NBA, as well as college hoops. Super excited about that. We're going to do some Twitter reactions. We got two different tweets we're going to react to and talk about in depth. And then also talk about the correct way to calculate units. There's an account that I follow that's tracking other handicappers, which I love. It's sort of a growing trend now. But the way he's actually calculating the units is incorrect. So I want to shed some light on that. All right, so let's dive into the review here from last week. And unfortunately, we didn't make any progress really. Looking at the year-to-date betting log, still at minus 5.23 units. We were actually down. We wagered full throttle with NCAA basketball on Saturday. It's been extremely profitable year-to-date since we made the changes. But unfortunately, it was hitting like 66%. I kept waiting for it to regress, and it never did. I jumped in on Saturday, and it was down, I think, 2 units on Saturday. And we had wagered on NHL. It also regressed, but then had a winning day yesterday. So we basically went deeper in the hole, about 8.5 units, and then got that back yesterday. So we're sitting at minus 5.25 units, minus 5.23 units. Not bad at all. And one thing I want to do, I want to show you, because this is a very valid point to make. Now, if you would, I posted this on Instagram, if you would have wagered everything via the models for college basketball, NBA, and NHL, all three of those models combined last week, you would have been up roughly 20 units. I think it was even more than that. Might have been like 21 units just in 1 week. And again, if you're new, that's grading one play as 1 unit. So a ton of success with these new models and changes that I made to NHL, NBA, and college hoops. So the question you might ask would be, well, why didn't you wager all of those plays? It's a great question. Well, here is the problem with that. Again, this is all new. I have no back test on any of these changes that I've made, even though the NHL model that I'm using is an older model, and I'll show you that in just a second. But the way that I'm handicapping is new. So it's my old model, but I'm just playing the top 10 teams if they have value. So we don't have any track record of this. So hypothetically, let's say I go all in, and with no back test, we don't know if this is going to be successful or not, and I just go full throttle and wager all three of these models. And let's say they're not successful and just the opposite happens. Let's say we're 20 units in the hole. Then the reaction would be, myself included, I would say, hey, that's a mistake, because you had no back test on this. You didn't know if this was going to be successful or not, but yet you went ahead and wagered, and now you're in this huge hole. So even though on paper it looks like it was an incorrect decision not to play all those games that had value via the model, in my opinion, it was still the correct way, because now we do have pretty much sufficient data, especially for college basketball and NBA, that, hey, this model, as it stands now, has been very successful and way ahead of the market. And what I mean by that is, we're cashing a lot of dogs, lines moving against us. The model is beating the market. Those games are still winning. I think we had for college basketball. Let me show you that too. That's an interesting point to make. And also too, you're getting you're seeing the lines from the day if you're watching this on YouTube. So let me go to college. If I have it, yeah, I do. Okay, back to the betting log. My bad. Okay, go to NCAA basketball. Let's go down here to the bottom. All right, so look at the plays from yesterday, and this is what I mean by being ahead of the market. We have Michigan State, line moved against them. This game, I can't remember. St. Peter's, that moved against us. Merrimack, I think it moved against us. It moved against us on all these. Maybe it was, I can't remember on Marist, but it definitely moved against us on West Virginia. West Virginia was opened as a pick, and that line went to +2.5 to even +3. So it moved against us on West Virginia, and they win 78-70, a lot closer than the score. So that's what I mean by being ahead of the market, meaning lines moving against us on all these games, but the model is still winning. And there'll be at some point where the market's going to catch up. And again, I've talked about this a million times with regards to modeling and when is the best time to start playing games. If you have, the very beginning of the season, when you have no data, is not the best time. Very difficult to handicap. But after you have sufficient data, if the model's good, that is prime pickings for making profit and gaining serious units in the season. And then, of course, the worst time is later in the season because the market has, quote, caught up. And, for example, that West Virginia-Colorado game, if they play that game again, West Virginia would probably be the favorite. So anyway, so keep that in mind when you're wagering on models. All right, so let's take a look at let me show you the year-to-date for NCAA basketball. Okay, since we've made all these changes to this model, it creates a ton of volume. It had like 30 plays for Saturday. It's now 52 and 37, which is incredible. That would be net out 15 units. It's probably right at 20 units because it's cashed a ton of dogs. So really excited about the changes we've made and what the changes were that we made. If you look up here on the left screen, these are the lines. What I was originally doing was I was playing double-digit favorites via the model, meaning like if a line was -14, we would consider playing that if they had value at the books. The problem with you have 300 teams in NCAA basketball, so a lot of times what ended up happening, the reason why I don't think this would have worked long term. So you have the 250th team, right, playing the 300th team. Well, as far as margin, the way I was calculating the lines, that would show, for example, that might show that team, that example there, American versus Loyola Maryland. It might show Americans -14, but in essence, both of those teams are, quote, bad teams, right? Does that make sense? So even though the model itself might show -14 line, and I've talked about this in previous videos, and at the end of the day, it's really, you're just creating an arbitrary number. And a lot of times there's a huge margin of error in doing that. So what I thought was, hey, a sharper approach might be using what we call the margin concept. So instead of playing what the model says as far as like the lines go, we're just playing the, quote, top teams via the model using a certain criteria. Like for Saturday, it was 30 teams. You can see there today, which is January the 13th, we only have 2 teams, which is a small slate, McNeese State and Stephen Austin. So both of those are plays. But since adopting this, quote, margin concept, we're playing just the top teams, the model has gone 52 and 37. So really, really, really excited with college basketball. And we'll just go full throttle with this and probably play this end of February. I think the market will adjust and you'll see us maybe not cash as many dogs as we have to start the season via the model, but excited about the progress there with basketball. Let's go switch gears now and look at the NBA model. Now, I explain this in some detail here as well. So starting on 12/19, I got real frustrated with NBA because we were up, I think this was last year, we were up about 6 units. We were approaching 10 units, lost all of that. NBA is a very difficult sport to handicap via plug-and-play model. And what a plug-and-play model is, you're just using the model. You're not using line movement. You're not factoring in injuries, situational angles, if the team's on a back-to-back, maybe playing their third game in 4 days, all on the road, model's not factoring any of that. And on the surface, it would seem like it would be almost impossible to create a plug-and-play model for NBA. A very important point to make. This is a great quote. There is a solution for every problem. Always remember that's true in life and true in sports betting. There's a solution for every problem. Meaning, I know, I don't have documentation, but I am 100% sure there's somebody out there that has a plug-and-play model for NBA, which means they're running the numbers, just like this model I'm going to show you here. Wake up in the morning, it has, whoever, like Orlando. We had Orlando last night. Via the model, Orlando wins. No other situational angles are factored into that. So what I did was I had to get creative and try to figure out and find stats that correlate to winning, but will not be influenced by maybe an injury, etc. So that's the only information I could give you. And this has been extremely successful. Now watch this. If we go to from 12/19, now I made some changes right here to it, but from 12/19 all the way to January the 2nd, it went 30-27, which is really good. You'd say that's barely above 50%, but again, that's cashing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think there was another dog in there I missed, but 7 or 8 dogs in that. So that was very profitable. But I wanted to increase the accuracy. So what I did over here was basically the same thing. Only play teams that are double-digit favorites via the model, and we have to have value. So that has been extremely successful. So you look here from 1-3 to 1-12, it has gone 15-8, which is over 60%. So super, super excited. Now, that is a relatively small sample size of 25 games, but so far it's been profitable. So if that stays there, and we can, get some profit out of NBA here for the next 3 months, that'd be huge. Huge, huge, huge. I would say probably same deal with NBA. You might can wager with this model up until maybe mid-March or something like that. And then would probably at that point be time to quote, shut it down. And then let me show you NHL because this is super fascinating. I went back to there's lines for today this is the old model. I'm sorry. This is the model that we used last year. This model hit like right at 19 units. And then this is the model that I wanted to test. This is my very first model. This model is like 11 years old. And so what I did was I ran the model just like I've always run it. But again, using the margin concept, we're only playing the top teams. So when any of those top teams are playing anybody else in the power rankings, we play on these teams up to minus 150, no puck lines. So we started tracking this from 1/6. And check this out. This is really cool. It had its first losing day last night. So it's gone 13-6, and it's cashed a lot of dogs. So really, really, really excited about this. And I've never tested this model this way. And another important point that when you're creating a model, don't ever throw a model away. Always save it in Google Sheets, or if you don't do that, make sure you write down the criteria, what stats you're using, how you calculate it, because then you could pull that model out and maybe, several years later, you make some adjustments to it and you could get it profitable again, which is what we've done. And I'm pretty much using, and wagering using this model as well. And this was factoring regression. I didn't play it. I played, let's look at this, played Detroit yesterday. And then I didn't play Dallas and Montreal, which lost, which at that point we had a winning day, which was a smart decision. And then, opted not to play those last 2 plays because I knew this model would eventually regress, which is another important point to talk about with regards to these models. If I could go back and do the week over college basketball, I had already waited 2 days. The model was hitting 66%. I'd already waited 2 days. I should have waited that Saturday and not jumped in on that Saturday because that was the day that it regressed. So that was like the first losing day the college basketball model had in, maybe a week and a half. So I should have waited. The model regressed, which means had a losing day, then jump back in on Sunday yesterday, which is what we did, and we wouldn't have taken that 2-unit loss in college basketball on Saturday, and then of course had a gain of roughly 2 units on Sunday. So regression will happen, and that's an important point to note. So when you're building models, you know, if you're back testing something and the model's doing really well, say it's hitting like 60%, I would not dive in immediately, especially if you have a significant sample size. I would wait and let that model regress, or at least have a losing day or maybe 2 losing days, then jump in, because it will regress. The definition of regressing is everything's always regressing back to 50%. Basically a coin flip. So if your model's hit 66%, it's not going to increase to 70%. Now it could, but it's more likely to go regress below 50%, so that it gets, it's more likely, you're more likely to have a couple losing days, go way below 50% to bring that 66% down closer to 50%. So the key point is, if you have a model and you're having a lot of success with it and it's hitting, say, 60%, let it regress and then dive in. Okay. But anyway, super excited with where we're going with all 3 of these models. I think this might be the first time we've ever, at any point with these 3 sports, been profitable at the same time for all 3 models, plug and play, which has always been my goal. And that was one of the most popular podcasts I made, Double Down on What You're Good At. Basically, Gary Vee talked about that. So modeling is my thing. So rather than put all this time and energy into situational handicap, I just put all my time and energy when I'm working in this business to work and making the models better. And I've also made some tweaks to soccer as well, and we'll talk about that. And I've had a gazillion soccer models, but again, always grinding. If we can figure out the soccer thing, I think we can, put down soccer for like 20 units a year. So making some changes, and I already started tracking that. All right, next, let's move on to some Twitter reactions from over the weekend. Let me pull this up here. Okay, this is our good buddy Rob Pizzola, who runs the Circles Off podcast. And he tweeted this out on January 10th. They told me Ohio State couldn't cover because too many people were betting Ohio State. They were wrong. All right, to provide some context here, what he's talking about is that Ohio State was a, quote, public team. I shared this on Instagram, meaning the majority of tickets were on Ohio State and the majority of money. So Ohio State was the, quote, public team. Texas was the non-public team. And we've often heard the term fade the public. So the conventional way to play this from a sharp perspective would be fade the public. Ohio State was the public team, meaning you would play opposite of that. Now, there are a lot of ways to do this business. You have bottom up, which I don't like to use that term. I use plug and play, which is what I just showed you modeling. And you can also use line movement, which is called the top-down approach. And of course, there's variations of that. When I first started out, I would look at the model. And then if the model had value, I would look at line movement. If line movement was positive, boom, that would be a play. Another way I handicapped NFL back in the day, I would look if we had value via the model, and I would make sure that it was a, quote, non-public team. And the way I calculated this, and I'll show you this screenshot in a second, if the team was getting less than 53% of the ticket count, I would consider, I take that back. I did 52 and 48 was basically even, meaning if teams were getting 52% and 48% of the ticket count, it was even. So if a team was getting 47% of the ticket count or less, then I would consider that the non-public team. So if a team was getting, say, 66% of the ticket count and I had value on that team, I would pass. The reason being is the majority of the time, the majority of people that wager on sports lose money. So if you do what the majority does, that specific example, the majority of people are 66% of the tickets are on that team, you're going to lose. Now, I tweeted this out, or I put this out on Instagram. And I said, I prefaced this, that if that's all you were doing, meaning like the only metric you were using is so the sports books had a liability, but Ohio State. So if you wanted to be on the sports book side, you'll often see sportsbook directors or that represent them on Twitter saying, hey, we need Texas big tonight. So if you're just using that as your primary way to handicap and you play Texas, then that would be the correct play. And the point to be made with Rob is obviously he probably has a model. He might be handicapping some stuff situationally. So he doesn't account for that. So the way that he played was correct, because a lot of times you'll hear handicappers tweet out, myself included, hey, even though it lost, it was the correct play. Meaning, so the model last night for NHL went 1-2, but those 2 losses were still the correct way for us based on how we handicap. Again, we don't account for public or non-public teams. So again, there's a lot of ways to do this business. So the right way for Rob was to play Ohio State because he doesn't give any consideration to betting splits. And I'm not sure exactly how he does handicap. But at the same token, somebody out there that just part of their model and the way they handicap is they factor in public and non-public teams. So if they play Texas, then that was, quote, the correct play for them. And let me show you something else that's fascinating. We'll pull up. This is Dave with Bet Online. Dave Mason I'm not sure if I don't think he's the actual bookmaker, but he posts, he's kind of their representative for Bet Online on Twitter. And you can see here, Tampa Bay was the public team last night. And he's actually showing, these are not ticket counts. He's showing money. He says Commanders at Buccaneers money. So 54% of the money was on Tampa Bay -3, 54% was on the money line -157. And how about 72% was on the over at 41.5. So they won all 3 of those. Tampa Bay, 62% on the spread. They cashed that. On the parlays, 58% was on Tampa Bay money line on parlays. They won that. And they also won 67% of the parlays were on the over. They won that. So they won all 6 of those. So they cashed big. Teasers, they lost 59% was on Washington, which makes sense. And then 89% of the teasers were on the over, so they won that. So the point to be made in this, when you hear the term fade the public, it's a legit term. And let me explain that. If the sports books lose, so if it's like, for example, the Texas, they said, hey, we have a liability on Ohio State. We need Texas. If the majority of time the sports book loses those games that they need, they will lose money long term. Do sports books lose money long term? They do not. They profit. So the majority of the time, they beat the public. So if the public, in this example, 54% of the money is on this team, the majority of time, they are going to win. That doesn't mean 100%. I don't know why I have to explicitly explain this, because sometimes my DMs blow up. When we say majority of the time in sports betting, we do not mean 75%. We do not mean 85%, just slightly more than 50%. Right? So the best handicappers, a good record would be 54%, 55%. And it can even be less than that if you play a lot of underdogs, which I do. So when we talk about majority of the time, we're only talking 4 to 5% above, quote, 50%. Okay? And if you do that, even on the handicapping side or the sportsbook side, you'll make a lot of profit. So there is some validity to public and non-public teams. Now, I want to show you this too. This is I almost said the old one. The old website was sportsbookreview.com. This is bookmakersreview.com. And you look at NFL there, these are results from yesterday. Denver. Now, there's a lot of debate now in the sports betting space about the validity of these betting splits. Now, I did handicap this way many years ago. I don't do this anymore, but I did many years ago. Meaning if a team was a non-public team, I would play that. If I had value, like for example, if I had value on Denver, I would have not played that because 69% of the ticket count. So the way they calculate this was, you see all these books, Bet Online, Bovada, Bookmaker, Heritage, Pinnacle's in there as well. So this is a consensus. This is not one specific book. So this is why if you are going to look at the betting splits, you don't want to look at one specific book. You don't want to look at a public book because a public book is not going to be as accurate. You want a consensus line like this. So they add all these ticket counts up, and 69% of the ticket count was on Denver, 31% was on Buffalo. So the non-public team was Buffalo. If you'd have played Buffalo, that would have been a win. Green Bay, 58% of the ticket count was on Green Bay, 42% on Philadelphia. Washington, 48%. Tampa, 52%. So I would consider Washington and Tampa the way that I did it many years ago that's basically a 50-50 game. So 50%, that favors the dog. Washington won. So if you apply that concept of fade to public, you would have gone 3-0. All right. But again, I don't handicap that way anymore. But there is validity to fading the public, because if it didn't work, sportsbooks would lose money. Okay. All right. Now, next Twitter reaction we're going to look at is there are several several Twitter accounts that have popped up. And what they're doing is they're tracking a lot of these handicappers that don't post their year-to-date record or year-to-date winnings, this is beautiful. This is one TR handicap tracker. I follow him. He does a great service. And he has posted a lot of results from Wager Talk. Now, whether this is accurate, just full disclosure, I'm not sure how he's getting this. I'm making the assumption that it's accurate in what he's showing. So just for full disclosure there. The only issue that I have is he's actually calculating these units incorrectly. And I want to talk about why this is really important. So you can see here he has this particular handicapper. He says he's down 18,194. Now he calculates that as down minus 181 units. That is incorrect. Now the reason why you see a lot of, and I did this too, Sports Watch Monitor does this, another monitoring service. The old school monitoring services represent a unit as $1,000. So if you take 18,194 divided by 1,000, that's 18.1 units. And the reason it was calculated this way, for example, let's say he was up 181 units. That would be incorrect. And the reason that they calculated it per 1,000 is the quote old school sharps wagered basically 1,000 a game. I did that early in my career when I first started, maybe the first 7 or 8 years, I would wager basically full units. That's what that means. So, but the reason why it's one play is 1 unit, if somebody said I'm up 181 units, if you were advertising your services to the general public, a $100 player would say, wow, if I would have wagered every single one of those games, I would be up 100 times 181, $18,000. That's incorrect. So a $100 player, if somebody says, hey, I'm up 18 units and they're calculating it correctly, one play equals 1 unit, and you wager $100, you would be up $1,800. So again, I'm not defending the folks here at Wager Talk, but when you see it represented in 1,000 like this, 18,194, like for example, college basketball, 3,400, he was up 3.4 units. And then for college football, there, $306, he would be down 0.3 units. So one play equals 1 unit. Does that make sense? So if somebody's saying, hey, like for example, we were up 47 units last year. If a $100 player had played every single game and wagered 1 unit, $100 on each game, they would be up $4,700. Does that make sense? Or if somebody had wagered exactly $1,000 on each game, they would be up $47,000. So full disclosure on that, and hopefully that makes sense. All right, we're going to wrap the podcast up and talk about one final thing. We're going to launch the stat model building program on Thursday or Friday, and I'm really excited about that. You will learn a ton about how to build models, and I'm basically going to give away everything. I do not hold back at all. You will learn a ton about how to build models. You also get access to a model. I'm thinking about using the college basketball model. So if you sign up, you'll actually get one legit model that's profitable. In addition to that, we'll help you build another model, and you'll get access to the coaching videos that we have specifically for building models. It's a great foundation for learning. It's very expensive, way more than my normal service, which is only $50 a month. If you're interested in joining that, there's a link in the description of this video. But if you want to sign up for the Stat Model program, there's a link for that in the description, or you can go to the website, go over to the right side where it says Stat Model. You can put in your email address and you'll get information on that when it launches either Thursday or Friday. So that concludes episode 43 of the Underdog Sniper podcast. Hope you guys have a great and profitable week. Talk to y'all soon. Peace.